How's it going, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another kind of quick guide to a champion. And this time, guys, I'm picking a somewhat off-meta pick. I'm doing Bruiser Fizz top lane, and the biggest reason for this, guys, is I've been trying this pick out in solo queue, and I've had actually pretty good success on it. Overall, I am I'm only a couple games in solo queue, but on one of my Smurf accounts, I've also been doing relatively well with it. And some of the biggest reason for it, guys, is that Fizz has some really good scaling, and he's also very good with just with his raw stats. And so as you progress in the game, he gets a lot more powerful. So to get started, let me just kind of show you off his abilities with that kind of quick guide style that I usually do, along with a few other things about him and give you kind of a couple pointers on his build and other things. If you've noticed, I am currently level 18 with full build, and I just wanted to showcase the top tier power there is, that is Fizz at the very end of it. So, first up, guys, let's talk about Fizz's Q, which is going to be the ability you're going to want to max the first. And the reason why is it scales at 100% of your base AD. It is called Urchin Strike. Fizz dashes through his target, dealing 109 physical damage plus 70 plus a percentage of your AP. I believe it is about 60% AP ratio. And the biggest reason that this is like the one you want to max the most, you want to max this one first because it's a dash that gets you into a fight. It also applies your W's passive. So if you're noticing down here before it auto resets, you have a 4-second cooldown on this. So let me just do full mana/energy. You have a 4-second cooldown on it. That's a super low cooldown at 40% CDR. Also, because of the build path, you are relatively tanky for Fizz, and for quite a few champions, it's going to be really hard for them to deal with you because you are just tanky enough and super mobile. So these are things that generally Riot wants to avoid combining. But their most recent buff just made him actually relatively strong. They gave him some a little bit of love towards his damage, as he wasn't being played very much, and a lot of people have noticed it and have been playing him in the mid lane. But what a lot of people haven't noticed is just how good his raw stats are. So anyhow, let's talk about his next one, his W. And the reason I moved up here to the lane is to showcase a big part of his W, which is that it gets auto reset every time you kill somebody with it. This here is going to be his Sea Stone Trident. It gives you a passive that on hit you poison somebody, so watch, and you just tick up damage over time. You can activate it for a bigger burst of damage, and if you kill somebody or you kill a unit with it, it resets automatically. So it's a really good tool for clearing waves. For somebody who doesn't have very much wave clear, it's a very useful tool to make sure that you can consistently last hit. Now note that this is the ability that I max second on this build. And the reason I do it second is that it becomes a very important ability because it scales really well. So just the passive alone, at my current max build, is at 60 base plus a current of about 35% roughly magic damage scaling, which isn't a whole lot, but that's still really good for just a passive. Because look at that, over time it's ticking away for about 26, 22, 20 something a second. That's pretty good. And then when you proc it, your next basic is going to do 130 plus about half of magic that you have. And then it allows you to deal an additional 30 plus 141 magic damage on hit per hit while it's active if you haven't killed somebody. And then the first person you kills, it refunds about 80% of the cost. It gives you back the majority of the mana, so you can do this pretty close to indefinitely of using it to farm with. It's just a really useful tool, and it's a key part of his kit for the reason that he's actually pretty good as this Bruiser build. Last basic ability, guys, is going to be your E, which is going to be your Playful Trickster. And this one, as many people know it, is also known as his Troll Pole, where you just jump up and you can jump down. Now, you can activate it early, and it deals 270 plus about, I can't actually guess that one. That's about 3/4, so about 75% roughly, I think. About 75% of your magic damage to nearby enemies. If you do not reactivate it, you deal damage in a larger area and slow all enemies hit by 60%. So what does that mean? So if I don't reactivate it, it then hits a slightly larger area, and everybody who's hit by it is then slowed. If I do reactivate it, I can reactivate it kind of fast, and if you noticed, it was a much smaller radius. Now, what is the point of being able to reactivate it fast? Well, you can do things like this. If you reactivate it fast, you can jump a lot farther. So it's a really good tool for making you untargetable, because once you're up here, they can't target you. Even if you have already been targeted, you can avoid stuff like Karthus R's, and a couple other big abilities that use targeting. Now, the last of his abilities is going to be his R, which is going to be Chum the Waters, guys. Chum the Waters shoots out a giant projectile. Is a big, and after a delayed amount of time, it summons your shark. Now, if it hits a target enemy, it slows them. After 2 seconds, it erupts from the ground, knocking them up. It also gives you true sight, so if they're invisible, you know where they are. The farther the fish travels before attacking, the bigger the shark it attracts, dealing 350 plus 323 to 500 plus 484. So it goes anywhere from about 78% scaling to over 150 to about 105% scaling, which is still pretty good. Magic damage and slowing by 40% to 80%. So the slow gets larger the longer the projectile. Now, another big reason that I like this build is because you don't necessarily have to always land your shark. This build gives you a lot of cooldown, which is really good. And it puts your ulti on a really low cooldown, because he already has kind of a low ulti cooldown, but then plus all the CDR that you're building because of this build path, you end up with 40% CDR, which means that it gets brought pretty low. On top of that, I also am going the Ultimate Hunter rune here, so every time you get a kill or an assist on somebody, it helps increase that cooldown by 5%. So your ultimate has a 5% cooldown, reduced cooldown, and then an additional 4% per bounty hunter stack. So if I get all 5 stacks, that's an additional 20. So that gives me 25% increased cooldown reduction on your ulti, which means your ulti will be at about a 26-second cooldown, which is really nuts. Now, normal Fizz builds can get to this cooldown reduction, and yes, you're going to probably do a lot more burst, but the reason that I've been talking about this Bruiser Fizz build is because it's actually not a bad top lane option. Now, there are better top lane options, trust me, but for many players, the top lane role is kind of an off role for many, and so I try to find something that's a bit more custom for either mid players or people who have played Fizz in the past that can probably use him. Now note, the rest of his rune build is still relatively the same that you see on mid lane Fizz. You're going to have an electrocute along with your shoot, I forgot this one. Sudden Impact plus Zombie Wards, and then the Ulti Hunter is really useful. And then I go Transcendence into a, what is that, something Storm, Gathering Storm, there you go. And then I do double AP rune stats and a 90 health. And the reason I do health is, it just helps you a little bit better in the lane. You know, the resistances are nice, and I guess you can, you know, tailor your resistances to your lane opponent, and that might help you a little bit better in being able to pressure them. Note, he's really bad against the ranged top laners. He goes pretty even, if not ahead, with most of the melee top laners. But let's talk about his items real quick before we kind of summarize how you should play him in the top lane. Now, note, I most of the time will be starting off with Hextech Proto Belt, and the reason why is it gives you relative fake wave clear, like that. You can use it to wave clear. You can use your W to wave clear. I don't really recommend using the W to wave clear. You're going to be maxing it last, so it doesn't do nearly as much damage in the early game. It's also one of your biggest escape tools, which makes him a really safe laner. Now, note, I also always pretty much go Sork Shoes. I occasionally will change it up to one of the tankier boots, and the reason why is if I'm not getting ahead, then I don't really need the Sork Shoes. Yeah, cool, it helps me do more damage in the late game when I get to the Death Cap, but Death Cap is my last item, and it's a situational item that I've never gotten to. Now, my second item, outside of boots, which the boots would be relative to whatever you're against. If there's a lot of CC and a decent amount of magic damage, of course, go Merc Treads. If there's just a lot of on-hit auto attacks, then I recommend going Ninja Tabi. But outside of the boots, the next item is going to be up in the air. Relative, again, it's going to change subject to who you're playing. For instance, if you're fighting an AD top laner, and you're not roaming much, which Fizz also has the potential to roam really well because of his mobility in his kit, then you might want to just kind of stick to the item that's going to match you better in the lane. So Abyssal Mask and Frozen Fist are going to be your two big choices here. Sorry, I said Frozen Fist. That is the upgraded version. That is from Ornn. It is Iceborne Gauntlet. Anyhow, you're going to want to stick to one of those two items usually, as both of them give you a slight power spike, but they also give you resistances, which will make it easier for you to survive your lane opponent. Note, the Abyssal Mask is a just universally good item on him, as it gives you the new Catalyst buff, buffed passive, along with the fact that it gives you the abilities of whenever you're near somebody, they take 15% increased damage. Right, 15% of damage taken from champions is gained in mana spending, blah 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 blah. Where is it? Nearby enemies take 15% more magic damage, which is just really good. It's like pseudo magic pen for you. And it makes you tanky, and it gives you mana, which means you can spam your abilities for longer, and it gives you HP. So like all of it's just good for this build path. And then next up, I generally get a Morellonomicon because still you do want magic pen at least somewhere in the kit. Along with it, that it gives you it gives you Grievous Wounds, which is super useful, which, you know, just kind of helps you keep people's healing down and prevent, you know, somebody from healing through your damage all the time. And then lastly, of course, I have the Death Cap listed down there, and the reason I have the Death Cap there is it's just a little bit of extra damage for you along the way. You don't necessarily have to go. You can find a better situational item that might be better than Death Cap. But I found that that's just a good, you know, universally strong item towards the end of your build path for you. Just gives you extra chunking damage force towards the end, so if it does go late, you can help carry your team. So we've really covered most of the bases on it. Now, the playstyle of Fizz changes ever so slightly in comparison to what was how you play him in the mid lane. So it's not, you know, horrendously different, but there is a slight variance to how you'd play Fizz in the mid lane to how you play him in the top lane. As you know, he is not technically suited to be a top laner in any real case of the words. So how do you know, how would you change how you play him? Well, the way I change how I play him is I play him a little bit more passively. I don't actively attempt to go for kills early until probably level 6. And I don't really seek for roams all that often either. So the biggest tool that I'd give you for playing him in the laning phase is kind of gauge how you're trading with your opponents, because you want to use your Q and your E to trade. You want to go in with you set up your W, you go in with your Q, which then applies the W, and then hit with your one auto, and then E out if you can. And this allows you to just kind of trade it in the laning phase. Otherwise, if you can't really trade very well with them, just wait for them to push towards tower. Your clear under tower is actually really good while you use your W to help execute. It gives you an additional like 80 damage on autos, so it's as if you were attacking the minions with a BF sword, and it gives you back mana for it, which means that you can do this relatively indefinitely to just clear your wave out and help you last hit, so you won't fall behind in farm. And if your opponent, you know, wants to try to get that pressure, it's going to be much harder for them, as you can just execute the minions at a much higher health percentage. So hopefully, guys, this gives you a quick tip to how to play top lane Fizz. Maybe you'll find it I'll find out that this is becoming a more popular build. Maybe you guys will find it more interesting to play in your games. Hopefully it helps you guys out, and as always, guys, I hope you have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day.